Welcome back to yet another episode of Weird Yu-Gi-Oh! Card Effects, the series where I take a look at older Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards and talk about how their effects have changed over the years. As always, this series is not meant to talk about the metagames of old versus new school Yu-Gi-Oh! But rather only talk about card effects in particular. Now, in the last video, we did something a little bit different. We didn't really talk about old versus new school card effects. We mostly just talked about older card effects that were really weird and maybe never repeated. In today's video though, we're going back to our roots. We're comparing and contrasting the original printings of older cards versus the most recent printings in order to analyze how card effects have changed over the years. Wall of Illusion is the first card that I want to talk about in today's video, and man was this card's original printing really weird. To be fair, this version of the card was from Starter Deck Yugi, the very first starter deck in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Alongside Starter Deck Kaiba, and yeah, it's going to be pretty weird. Wall of Illusion is a level 4 Fiend Dark monster with 1000 attack and 1850 defense. Its original effect says this: the monster attacking this creature is returned to its owner's hand. Any damage resulting from the attack is calculated normally. So if you've seen the older episodes of this series, you probably already know that old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Borrowed a lot from old school Magic the Gathering. This is a perfect example of this because it refers to itself as a creature, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have creatures, it has monsters. I would imagine they made this decision for word variety. You know, instead of having monster appear multiple times in the same sentence, why not have the first case say monster and the second case say creature? Now, in reality, when you're making a card game, you don't really want word variety for the sake of variety. You want cards that are easy to read and understand, and probably ones that mention your own mechanics, like monster instead of creature. The second sentence also doesn't really need to be there because that is sort of implied when you read the card that it does damage anyway, but once again, I understand because this card was released in the very first starter deck for Yu-Gi-Oh! So yeah, there wasn't really a standard for how card effects should look. Just for comparison here, the most recent printing of Wall of Illusion actually was from several years ago, but at least it makes more sense. It is printed with problem-solving card text, and it says if this card is attacked by a monster after damage calculation, return that monster to the hand. It doesn't say creature, and also it doesn't mention that your opponent still takes the damage because creature isn't a real term and the damage part doesn't really have to be stated. Next up we have Shining Angel, and I will say here that this pretty much could have been any of the battle recruiter cards from old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Mystic Tomato or the other ones, but I went with Shining Angel because it is one of them that is the most iconic in my opinion. Shining Angel is a level 4 fairy light monster with 1400 attack points and 800 defense. It says with its original printing back in Magic Ruler, when this card is sent to the graveyard as a result of battle, you can select one light monster with an attack of 1500 or less from your deck and special summon it to the field in face-up attack position. Oh, and by the way, no tribute is required for monsters of level 5 or more. The deck is then shuffled. Now, we've already talked about the deck is then shuffled part of old school cards in a previous installment to the series, so the part that I want to draw attention to here is that it tells you no tribute is required for monsters of level 5 or more. Now, normally I would make fun of this part of the card because why do you have to say this? However, I went back and double checked my original Yu-Gi-Oh! Rulebook, the 2.0 version, which was the very first version released in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, and I found out that in the summoning portion of that rulebook, it doesn't actually mention anywhere in the tribute summoning section or the special summoning section that when a level 5 or higher monster is special summoned that you don't have to tribute. So even though this is pretty silly, and I will say that it probably should have been mentioned in the original rulebook because there are plenty of cards that could special summon higher level monsters, I will say that to Shining Angel's credit, it didn't actually say that in the rulebook, so I can understand why it was written on the card. That being said, let's take a look at the most recent printing and see what they cut. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one light monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck in face-up attack position. Yes, they cut the parentheses, yes, they cut the deck is then shuffled, and also they cut the part where you select the light monster just to special summon it instead, and I feel like overall Shining Angel is a fantastic example of why problem-solving card text is so important. It really does shorten the overall effect of the card without losing any of the important parts. Next up, we have Toon Mermaid, and this is going to be a journey because the first printing is terrible, the second printing is terrible, and I would even argue the most recent printing is really bad as well. I do apologize in advance because with all the older Toon monsters, if you remember back from Toon Dark Magician Girl a couple of videos ago, that it's very difficult to find high quality scans of them, and because their text is so small, it can be difficult to read. The original version of Toon Mermaid from Magic Ruler is really weird. It says this card cannot be summoned unless Toon World is on the field. This card cannot attack in the same turn that it is summoned. Pay 500 life points each time this monster attacks. When Toon World is destroyed, this card is also destroyed. If your opponent doesn't control a Toon monster on the field, this card may inflict direct damage to your opponent's life points. If a Toon monster is on your opponent's side of the field, your attacks must target the Toon monster. So there are a lot of weird parts about this card effect. Most importantly though, it doesn't mention how you're supposed to summon it. This is a big problem because this Toon monster can't be normal summoned. It can only be special summoned, and you can special summon it when Toon World is on the field, but this original version doesn't really say that. Where this gets really weird though is that the second printing of this card fixes some of the issues but creates even more in other areas. The second printing of Toon Mermaid says this card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card can only be special summoned while Toon World is on your side of the field. You can special summon this monster from your hand, but tributes are required for monsters level 5 or more. This card cannot attack in the turn that it is summoned. Unless you pay 500 life points, this monster cannot attack. When Toon World on the field is destroyed, this card is also destroyed. If your opponent doesn't control a Toon monster, this card can attack your opponent's life points directly. If a face-up Toon monster is on your opponent's side of the field, you must select the Toon monster as an attack target. So yeah, that's a lot of text, and yeah, it has many of the same issues as Toon Dark Magician Girl, which we already talked about, but the really weird part on this card that doesn't make a lot of sense and also wasn't in the original printing is the third sentence that says you can special summon this card from your hand, but tributes are required for monsters level 5 or more. Basically, many of the old school Toon monsters explained the mechanics of all Toon monsters in their text, so that's why a level 4 monster mentions that you have to tribute if it's level 5 or higher. But where this really gets crazy is that the most recent printing of Toon Mermaid, which does have problem-solving card text, still has this awkward sentence. Cannot be normal summoned or set, cannot be special summoned unless you control a face-up Toon World, must first be special summoned from your hand by tributing the same number of monsters needed for a tribute summon, normally 0. This card cannot attack the turn it is special summoned. You must pay 500 life points to declare an attack with this monster. If Toon World on the field is destroyed, destroy this card. This card can attack your opponent directly unless they control a Toon monster. If they do control one, this card must target a Toon monster for its attacks. Like I said, it is still super confusing, still has information that doesn't really need to be there. I suppose there are certainly ways to increase the level of Toon Mermaid while it is in your hand, but realistically the only reason that sentence was on some of the older printings of Toon Mermaid is because old Toon monsters were an absolute mess with their effects. And finally, we have 7 completed, and this is a very short entry in today's video, but it is still worth mentioning. 7 completed is a very old school equip spell card released in Pharaoh's Servant, and the original effect says this: a machine type monster equipped with this card increases either its attack or defense by 700 points. You cannot change your choice as long as this card remains face up on the field. 2 parts about this card really stand out to me. One of them is unique to 7 completed, one of them is part of many old school equip spells. The first part here that really doesn't need to be on the card but is pretty unique to 7 completed is that second sentence: you cannot change your choice as long as this card remains face up on the field. What a weird thing to put on the card. I think players would understand that you have to make the decision when the card is played, but I suppose some people could be confused, which is why they put that on the card. The other part of his card that really confused me back in the day is that very first part, a machine type monster equipped with this card, blah blah blah. Now why is that confusing? Well, many old school equip spell cards said something along those lines. The older versions of these card effects imply that you can equip them to any type of monster, but only a specific type of monster will get the boost. However, pretty much all of the cards that were written that way have been updated. For example, the 7 completed that we now have says this: activate this card by choosing attack or defense, equip only to a machine type monster. It gains 700 attack or defense depending on the choice. A lot of those older cards aren't very good, and there aren't a lot of great reasons that you would want to equip them to things that aren't getting the boost, but technically speaking, that's not really how they were supposed to work, and the original text wasn't super clear about that. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching episode 5 of Weird Yu-Gi-Oh! Card Effects. If you missed an episode, make sure to go check out my channel. I have a playlist on the very first page. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.